In this section, we're going to talk about restoring a database using the graphical interface. So I'm going to pull up SQL Server Management Studio, and I'll connect to the local instance. I'll open up Databases. I'll highlight one of the user databases. Right-click, go to Task. Then from there, I'll open up the Restore menu, and I'll select the option for Database. On the first page at the top, I need to select the source. My choices are database or device. I would like to restore from a file, and in SQL Server terminology, that is a device. So I'll highlight device, then I'll click on the three-dot button all the way to the right, and that will allow me to select the file. I'll go to Add, and then I'll select the file that I'm interested in using for the restore. Click OK. OK again. So now the machine has read the file and pulled out certain information from it. It knows the name of the database, it knows the date and time the backup was taken, and it gives me some other information at the bottom, the name of the server, the name of the database, etc., etc. If I would like to verify that this is a valid backup file, I can click on Verify Backup Media, and we'll notice over here to the left, I see a little check mark saying done, and at the top I get a message saying backup media verified successfully, so we know the file is good. That's just optional. If you want to do the verify backup media, you don't have to. So for all the other values, I'm just going to accept the default and hit OK. And in the upper right hand corner, we see a progress bar. It gets to 100%, and I get a message saying the database was restored successfully. So that is good. I can go ahead and open up the database and see that there are tables, and I'll right click on one and make sure there is some data in those tables. All of that looks good. Now let's go back to the interface and look at some of the details. So again, I'll highlight the database I'm interested in, right click, go to Task, Restore Database. And there are 3 pages here, General, File, and Options. We already looked at most things on the General page. In the File section, we have the option to relocate the database. So currently I have my data stored on the E drive and logs stored on the L drive. If I would like to, I can change where those files are stored during the restore process. And then I have several other interesting things in the options page. I have the option to replace the database, the option to preserve replication settings, and the option to restrict the restored database. So by default, the computer will put the database online and accepting connections from all users. If we'd like to limit that to one user, we could say restrict access to the restored database. Also, by default, it will run restore with recovery, and when we say with recovery, we get an explanation of that below. Leave the database ready to be used by rolling back any uncommitted transactions. Additional logs cannot be restored. The other option here is restore with no recovery, which means leave the database in a non-operational state, but do not roll back any uncommitted transactions, which means that additional transaction logs can be restored. So in my situation, I just had the full database backup with no transaction logs, and therefore the appropriate thing to do would be restore with recovery. But hypothetically, if you had a full database backup and one or more transaction log backups that you needed to restore immediately, then when doing the first restore, you would restore with no recovery, and you would continue doing restores with no recovery until you got to the last restore, and that one you would do with recovery. We also have at the very bottom, close existing connections to the destination database. If someone is currently connected to the database, we cannot restore it. So we will need to close those connections. If we check this little box, then the connections will be closed as soon as possible. Whereas if we don't check it, then the server will just wait until the connections close naturally.